I recently purchased this Squier 40th Anniversary Vintage Edition jazz bass. For the most part, I really like it, and I find the build quality to be as good or better than American-made Fender basses that cost 5 times as much. But I've already talked about that. When I first received this bass and played it, I was blown away, and it sounded just fine through my acoustic B100 amp in my basement practice space. But that night, I took it and my Fender Rumble 40 amp to a rehearsal in a room full of fluorescent lights. There was a lot of buzz. The bass came with a gold anodized pickguard, which isn't really my thing. I happened to have a tortoiseshell pickguard sitting in a drawer, so I swapped it in. And when I did, I noticed that there was absolutely zero RF shielding inside the pickup and control cavities. That's an area where Squier often cuts costs. Out of sight, out of mind. But not out of ear. Other Squiers I've owned at least had a thin layer of black insulating paint. The stuff embedded with graphite and nickel particles that gets all over your hands if you touch it. The stuff that comes in a bottle with a million health warnings. Anyway, this bass didn't even have that. No shielding at all. That needed to be fixed. I decided to use copper foil tape. It seemed a bit easier, or at least safer, to work with, and it also supposedly works better than the paint. So I ordered a roll. Now, I had heard horror stories of how sticky the stuff is. I figured it would be like the time I tried to repair our roof gutters with flex tape, a nightmare to deal with. Hence my decision to line the top of the bass with painter's tape first. If the copper tape was super sticky, I didn't want to risk accidentally damaging the visible finish of the bass. That turned out to be completely unnecessary, as the copper tape was not excessively sticky and actually was very easy to handle. I was quite pleased to see that the pickup channels are pretty deep, and the pickups have a really thick chunk of foam on the bottom. I'm planning to eventually replace them with some DiMarzio noiseless pickups, but I ran into an issue with those on a previous Squier I owned. The channels weren't deep enough for the pickups to fit into, and I had to route them out myself. Woodworking is not a skill I possess, and the results were a mess. But at least they were hidden. I don't think I'll need to do any of that with this bass, which is good, since now I would also have to redo the copper foil. I'm a designer, so I have a strong visual attention to detail, but I also do not work with physical objects very much. When I do, I tend to get impatient and rush, and generally make a mess of things. I tried extremely hard to be patient and careful when applying this copper tape. Fortunately, once you peel the backing off, it's essentially just a really thin foil that's sticky on one side, so it's easy to mold into shape. Another thing that happens when I'm working with physical objects is that I have a terrible tendency to absent-mindedly misplace my tools and hardware. I set things down as I'm in the middle of a task, and then I have no idea where I left them. Such was the case here, as one of the pickguard screws went AWOL, but it turned out I was just sitting on it. Of course, once I had the foil in place, the screw holes for the pickups were covered. It was easy enough to line up the bridge pickup, but the cavity for the neck pickup is much larger than the pickup itself, so the only way I could get the pickup aligned properly was to put the pickguard on first. The Squier came with some of the best stock strings I've ever encountered, but as I generally prefer flats, or at least sort of flats, when I restrung the bass here, I swapped in a set of DR flats that I had previously installed on the American Ultra. Strings with silk-wrapped ends don't like being removed and reinstalled, so the silk on these is a fuzzy mess now, but I still like the feel of the strings quite a bit. Their tension seems to be a bit lighter though, so I ended up having to do some intonation adjustments, and I may need to either adjust the truss rod or the saddle heights, but I'm giving things a few days to settle in before I mess with that. Okay, let's hear how it sounds. This is running through the acoustic B100 again, just picked up by my iPhone's mic. Not an ideal situation for recording, but I wanted to give a sense of the actual amount of buzz coming through the amp in the room. The day after I installed the foil, I had a part gig with the big band I play in, and I decided the Squier was up to the challenge. I'm pleased to say that even with the perhaps questionable park electricity, there was no noticeable buzz. The bass worked exceptionally well. Let's give it a listen in action.